and implemented by the OECD in cooperation with the European Commission Task Force for Reform and Investment, the SG Reform. So let me start with a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphone off unless you need to speak. The conference will be recorded, so please stay muted and keep your camera off if you do not want to be recorded. Interpretation for English, French, German, and Polish is available. You can switch languages by clicking on the menu at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note that speakers will change languages frequently. Please make sure to use headphones connected by wire to avoid noise and to speak as slowly and clearly as possible for interpreters. And finally, there will be some time at the end of the event for an interactive session with the audience. Please do not hesitate to share your comments and questions via the chat during the different presentations. Now we have a packed agenda today, so briefly let me go through it. We will start with opening remarks from the Commission and the OECD. The OECD will then present the 4 regional chapters that they have prepared. They will present for 10 minutes and then give the floor to the region for a reaction. After that, the OECD will provide an overview of the main challenges identified across all the 4 regions and will share the next step of the project. Then we will open the floor for observer countries to react on this report's presentation. And lastly, we will open the Q&A for an interactive discussion, after which we will close with some concluding remarks. And without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Kjartan Bjørnson, Head of the Governance and Public Administration Unit in the SG reform of the European Commission.
Thank you, Marco. Dear colleagues from the 4 beneficiary regions, representatives from the OECD, and also observing countries, and dear participants, it's a pleasure to deliver some short opening remarks on behalf of the European Commission and SG reform as we mark the launch of this important analytical report developed under the Technical Support Instrument project, enhancing regional access to and performance in EU initiatives and funds. So why is this TSI project with 4 regions? So Brussels capital, Wallonia, both in Belgium, and Silesia in Poland, and Thuringia in Germany, in partnership with the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship and SMEs, regions and cities important. That was a complicated sentence. I'd like to highlight 3 key reasons that, in my view, underscore the strategic importance of this moment, especially as the analytical report represents a significant milestone. First, this project directly addresses a key challenge, improving both access to and the effective absorption of EU funds. Plenty of EU funding exists, but it is often scattered in different instruments, each with their own, sometimes complicated rules and procedures for accessing them. This is a problem for all potential beneficiaries, but perhaps particularly for regions and municipalities who need the funding the most. The report that will be presented today identifies 12 strategic challenges which would need to be addressed. I urge you to make sure that the project goes beyond identifying the problems to also helping finding concrete solutions to these challenges. So that was the first. The second, it is important to combine investments and reforms. You can see investments as the hardware of the system, whereas reforms are the software that make the overall system function. Both elements, so reforms and investments, are needed to make the system run smoothly. This is the logic behind the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which in response to the COVID crisis have provided 650 billion euros in support of growth in EU member states. And thirdly, as the first draft of the next Multiannual Financial Framework will be presented to member states next month in July, it is expected that the next EU budget will build on the lessons learned from the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And that would mean an EU budget which is more focused, more strategic, and with priority for competitiveness, resilience, and defense. And in this context, regions must enhance their administrative and strategic capacities. They must streamline governance, and they must align local strategies with EU priorities. Today's launch of the analytical report represents a key milestone. It combines very rigorous analysis and expert knowledge, and also valuable stakeholder input and hands-on engagement at the regional level. The report goes beyond diagnosing challenges and opportunities. It's a call to action, and its insights can drive strong commitment and lead to concrete reforms on the ground. And let me conclude with this final note. And I think this is a very important task for you. It's an opportunity to turn today's discussion into meaningful and lasting progress in the region. So please reflect on how you may concretely turn each of the 12 challenges into opportunities for your region. I'm sorry that I cannot stay with you for the whole morning, but I wish you a very successful seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Björnsson, for your opening remarks and for your trust. Now, from the OECD side, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Dorothée Alain-Dupré, Head of the Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance Division at the OECD.
Thank you very much, Margot, and thank you, Kjartan, for your opening remarks. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today to launch the analytical report of this project, which, as its title suggests, aims to enhance access to and performance in EU funds across the 4 participating regions. Let me start by sincerely thanking the representatives from our 4 regions, the Brussels Capital Region, Silesia, Thuringia, and Wallonia, for their ongoing commitment. Your cooperation has been essential in enabling the OECD team to gather the data and insights needed to produce an evidence-based diagnostic of the challenges faced and opportunities to be exploited. The report that we will be discussing today presents for each region 3 main elements. First, a detailed stakeholder mapping related to the use and management of EU funds. Second, a SWOT analysis to assess each region's capacity to mobilize EU funds. And third, an in-depth review of 5 core challenges limiting access to EU funding. We have made a strong effort to capture the local realities of each region. Every territory has its own institutional landscape, administrative structure, and political context, of course, and therefore deserves tailored analysis. That said, one of the clearest takeaways from this work is that while each region faces unique issues, be it institutional complexity, stakeholder fragmentation, or administrative bottleneck, many challenges are shared. That is precisely why the 4 regions are together in this project, so that they can share their experiences and learn from one another. I also believe this report is particularly timely. It comes just 2 months after the European Commission published its midterm review of cohesion policy, and at a time when discussion on the future EU MFF are gaining momentum, as Kjartan mentioned. In fact, this report comes weeks before the Commission will present its formal proposal for the next MFF, expected in July. The midterm review flagged some important shifts, the growing emphasis on priorities such as competitiveness, defense, and housing, and a renewed commitment to simplification and flexibility aimed at reducing the administrative burden in EU funds access, an issue that lies really at the core of our report. And these changes are expected to be reflected in the next MFF covering 2028-2034. In this context, the analytical report we are launching today is not just relevant for the current funding period. It will also help regions prepare for what lies ahead. In other words, it offers a foundation to improve governance in ways that are not only responsive to today's challenges, but also adaptive to the evolving EU funding landscape. And beyond the 4 participating regions, I am convinced that the findings of this report will also be relevant to other EU regions and to our 3 observer countries in this project, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Moldova, whom I am very pleased to see represented today in this launch. And last but not least, I would like to thank SG Reform and the European Commission, and in particular, Kjartan, Nicole, and Katie for the excellent cooperation on this project. I'm very pleased that we can launch this report together now, and I look forward to hearing directly from the regions during today's discussion. Thank you very much to all, and back to you, Margot.
Thank you very much, Dorothée, for your opening remarks. We are now entering the core of our event. So we will be hearing from the OECD and the regions on each of the chapters of the report. And we will start with the Brussels Capital Region. On the OECD side, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Sandra Jolk, Policy Analyst in the Decentralization, Subnational Finance and Infrastructure Unit at the OECD.
Thank you, Margot. Good morning, bonjour, guten Morgen. Before I begin, please note that this presentation will be delivered in English. So again, if you would like to listen to it in French, German, or Polish, please click at the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Today, I will present the key findings from our work in the Brussels Capital Region. In the case of Brussels, and at the request of the region, our analysis focused specifically on public sector actors. So this includes both regional and local administration, as well as intermediary public agencies and coordination structures. And as said before, this assessment is part of the broader OECD EU project, and it is funded by the European Commission through the Technical Support Instrument. Here is today's outline. We will start with a short introduction to the Brussels Capital Region, then look at how EU funds are used in the region. We'll present findings from the OECD fact-finding mission, followed by a stakeholder map and a SWOT analysis, and finally, I will briefly discuss the key challenges and policy implications. Let me begin by providing some context on the Brussels Capital Region. For those of you less familiar with the regions, Brussels is both the capital of Belgium and, as you probably all know, also the political center of the European Union. It is home to over 1.25 million residents, or about 10.6% of the national population, and it is the most densely populated region in the country. It contributes about 16.4% to Belgium's GDP, and I think we can say it has high international visibility and also high institutional capacity. If we look at the political strategies in the Brussels region, perhaps we can see an alignment versus implementation gap. So the region has developed very strong strategies in areas such as innovation, the green transition, and digitalization. And these strategies are also well aligned with the priorities. However, alignment is not always matched by implementation. In many cases, the strategies do not include guidance on how to access EU programs, and responsibilities for follow-up and EU project development are not always clear. And we also believe that with the new regional government currently being formed, there is a timely opportunity to embed EU fund mobilization more firmly into the next government declaration. One particular challenge in Brussels is the so-called headquarters effect. Many EU-funded projects are located in Brussels on paper, because EU institutions and international organizations are based here. However, these projects are often led by actors that do not involve regional or local public administrations in Brussels. As a result, participation statistics may appear high, but do not reflect local engagement or impact. And this makes it very difficult to track the region's real performance in EU funds. And this is also why in this project we focus not only on figures, but on institutional conditions, experiences, and barriers. As part of this diagnostic, the OECD conducted a very successful fact-finding mission to Brussels in February this year. Over 2 days, we met more than 70 stakeholders from across the public sector. This included regional departments, public agencies, municipalities, and intermediary bodies. We held thematic roundtables, presentations, and bilateral meetings. And these exchanges helped us really understand the practical challenges that the administrations face when working with EU funds. And they also provided the foundation for the following analytical tools. Based on the mission and on our desk research, we developed a stakeholder mapping together with the region, which you can find on the next slide. Here we need to say thank you to the region, who really helped us a lot in putting this rather complicated stakeholder mapping together. The goal was to identify all public actors involved in accessing, managing, or supporting EU funds and the direct and indirect management. And this mapping really helped us visualize the institutional ecosystem and to pinpoint also coordination gaps, overlaps, and opportunities for development. In parallel, we developed a SWOT analysis to summarize the region's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strength, very briefly, I won't go over it all. They include very high regional autonomy, also very high technical expertise in some of the departments of the city and the region, and also access to strategic EU networks, given that there are many in Brussels. There are, however, also some weaknesses: fragmented coordination, quite a lack of budgetary flexibility, also related to the fact that there is currently no government, limited human resources in many units, also no dedicated resources to EU project development, and also the absence of shared evaluation tools. There are many opportunities at the same time in Brussels. We see the possibility to scale successful practices in the region. The strong proximity to its EU institutions is something that can be better capitalized. And also the creation of dedicated EU units in public bodies is something to explore in the following recommendations report. There are also some threats to mention. There is high competition for EU funding, of course. There are eligibility challenges also related to financing, pre-financing, and there is high public debt that limits also room for maneuver. These findings led us to identify 5 major structural challenges in the region. First, there is a persistent capacity and skills gap. So many administrations, especially at the municipality level or those less exposed to EU funds, lack the resources to engage meaningfully with EU funds. Second, coordination across actors remains quite fragmented in a very complicated, even multi-level governance setting within the region. There is also a very rigid financial framework that makes it very difficult to pre-finance or co-finance EU projects. This limits access, particularly for smaller entities. And fourth, Brussels, in our view, also underuses a little bit its strategic position as a hub for EU institutions and networks. So engagement in European platforms and networks is often ad hoc and decentralized, although there is a tremendous opportunities to build on that. And last, there is no central system for monitoring and learning and sharing knowledge, which is related to the headquarters effect that I mentioned earlier. So many administrations work in isolation, and there can be more done to build up a proper monitoring and evaluation system that works or that takes this headquarter effect into account. Very briefly on preliminary policy implications, while the full recommendations will follow in the next phase of this project, our findings point to several preliminary policy recommendations or implications, I should rather say. One is to appoint a dedicated EU contact point in all public administrations, to establish a cross-government coordination mechanism, clearly to look into the possibility to develop financial tools for co-financing and pre-financing. I think we'll hear more about that from the other regions too, to strengthen Brussels' participation in EU platforms and strategic fora, to create a shared knowledge management system, for example, for templates, project feedback, lessons learned, to promote more peer learning, and also exchange on good practices, what worked, what were successful applications and why, and to integrate EU fund mobilization more firmly into the next regional strategy with very strong political ownership as well. So to conclude, Brussels really has a very strong institutional base. The strategic priorities are very well aligned with the EU. It has unique access to European decision making. But to really fully benefit from all of that, the region must improve coordination, invest in their internal capacities, and really embed EU project development a bit more in day-to-day governance. And I think this diagnostic hopefully offers a shared foundation to guide the next steps in that direction. And so thank you very much for your attention. Merci beaucoup. Dank u wel. And I look forward to your comments and questions.
Merci beaucoup, Sandra. Thank you very much for your clear presentation. We would like now to hear from the region itself, and I am pleased to give the floor for about 5 minutes to Dr. Gert van den Eed, Deputy Secretary General and Acting Director General of Brussels International.
Thank you, Margot. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, first and foremost, allow me to warmly thank the European Commission and the OECD for their unwavering commitment to this project and for the excellent collaboration with my team throughout the process. The technical support instrument offers a unique opportunity for regions such as ours to benefit from your expertise and to enhance our own capacities, and crucially, to strengthen our cooperation with other European regions that will, while diverse, share similar structural challenges. What has already been achieved, particularly through the fact-finding missions, demonstrates how vital it is to involve local and regional actors. These actors bring forward the real issues on the ground and help to bridge the gap between regional realities and European policy frameworks. In my view, this is the most effective way to foster local ownership of the European project and to ensure that we are responding concretely to the needs of citizens, businesses, research and innovation stakeholders and civil society at large. In response to Mr. Björnsson's insightful introductory remarks, I would like to echo the point that equipping regions to become more agile is essential if we are to improve the efficiency of European fund absorption. We are all aware that the forthcoming proposal for the next Multiannual Financial Framework, expected on the 16th of July, will place a strong emphasis on simplification, rationalization, flexibility, and efficiency. Yet, I would also stress that these efforts must go hand in hand with a continued and meaningful role for the regions in the governance of these instruments. The principles of place-based policy, multi-level governance, and shared management must remain cornerstones of European programming. If we are indeed to take inspiration from the RRF in designing future instruments, then it is imperative that we integrate these principles more effectively. Without them, there is a real risk that we will fall short of our collective ambitions. Please excuse this slight digression, but I believe this perspective is essential to our discussions today. The challenges ahead are many, and as your report has so clearly demonstrated, Brussels is no exception in this regard. What strikes me time and again is the so-called Brussels paradox. Our region hosts the very heart of European institutions and networks, giving us a strategic edge, yet we do not always capitalize on this position to its full potential. This, however, is beginning to change. I'm very keen to see how your continued work through this project will help support this transformation. As you rightly pointed out, easier access to European funds depends on the early alignment of regional strategies with EU priorities. That is precisely why we have launched Productive Brussels. That's a regional task force bringing together all actors involved in economic development. Its purpose is to calibrate our industrial policy and align it with the European competitiveness agenda. Competitiveness is now a top EU priority and will be central to the upcoming financial framework. Through this initiative, we aim to generate strong synergies between regional and European instruments and to seize the right opportunities at the right time. To do so, we must also address the structural challenges outlined in your report. Some relate to resources, but many touch upon governance, institutional functioning, and public administration. As a manager within the Brussels administration, these concerns resonate deeply. One of our current reform tracks, called Optiris, is focused precisely on rationalizing and improving coordination within the Brussels institutional landscape. Your input comes at a particularly timely moment to inform and inspire that process. Allow me to highlight one final point: capacity. Despite limited resources, the Brussels International team has already developed a number of support tools and facilitated promising projects on housing, the circular economy, and smart mobility. But to unlock the full potential of EU funding, we now need to scale up. And that means investing in capacity, skills, and expertise, particularly for those actors who are currently less experienced. We all know that capacity building is not a cost, it's an investment, and one with the potential to deliver truly transformative results. With your continued support, I'm confident that we will be able to co-develop a clear actionable plan to implement your recommendations in the coming months, tailored to the unique needs and priorities of Brussels as an urban region. For my part, I will do everything within my means to ensure that all relevant actors remain engaged in this process and that Brussels is positioned to make the most of the opportunities Europe has to offer. I look forward to what promises to be a rich and inspiring meeting, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerd van den Eed, for your comments and to remind the importance of local actors, of the coordination between governments and public administration, and to have appropriate tools to support capacity to unlock the full potential of EU funds. I would like to remind you that you can continue asking your questions and making comments in the chat, and we will address them at the end of the event. And I would like now to move to the next region, Silesia in Poland. On the OECD side, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Olivia Borek, policy analyst at the Unit of Decentralization, Subnational Finance and Infrastructure in the OECD, who will speak in Polish.
Thank you very much, Margot. Oraz bardzo cieszę się, że mogę dziś przedstawić kluczowe wnioski z rozdziału naszego raportu poświęconego właśnie województwu śląskiemu w Polsce. Moja prezentacja będzie miała podobną strukturę do poprzedniej. Omówię kwestie związane z wykorzystaniem funduszy unijnych na Śląsku, przedstawię mapę interesariuszy oraz analizę SWOT, a zakończę na głównych wyzwaniach i wstępnych wnioskach politycznych. A więc zacznę od krótkiego wprowadzenia do regionu z myślą o uczestnikach spoza Polski. Województwo śląskie leży w południowo-zachodniej Polsce. Mieszka tam ponad 4 miliony osób, co stanowi 11,5% ludności kraju. Jest to drugie największe województwo pod względem liczby ludności, a zarazem najbardziej zurbanizowany region w Polsce. W temacie funduszy unijnych Śląsk otrzymuje bardzo znaczącą alokację środków w ramach zarządzania dzielonego, w tym ponad 2 miliarda euro z Funduszu Sprawiedliwej Transformacji. Województwo śląskie dysponuje wieloma strategiami regionalnymi oraz, jak pokazuje tutaj tabela, strategie te w dużym stopniu pokrywają się z zakresem tematycznym.
This includes both the more prominent funds under the European funds for Silesia,
However, when the implementation of these priorities through EU funding is explicitly mentioned, it is when we think about Creative Europe, for example, or Digital Europe, it is primarily in relation to the European funds for Silesia 2021 and 2027. Based on the data we have available, we have identified several trends on the current usage of EU funds by regional stakeholders. So let me give you some examples. So, for example, Silesian stakeholders tend to do better at some programs under direct and indirect management funds, but not others. For instance, the region accounts for 12% of Poland's Erasmus Plus fund use, however, just 2% of Creative Europe funding. When we look at specific beneficiaries, we also see that the participation by SMEs and NGOs is fairly low across all programs. For example, in the case of ERDF projects, these stakeholders are almost entirely absent. Similarly, for the Just Transition Fund, we see that NGOs make up only 4% of the funds used in Silesia. The same trend is seen for funds under direct and indirect management. And that's why in December 2024, we went to Katowice for a fact-finding mission. We wanted to collect qualitative data to back the quantitative data shown in the graphs we have just seen. It was 2 days. We conducted roundtables across 6 themes, including education, youth participation, the just transition, and innovation in SMEs. We engaged with around 70 stakeholders from a wide range of sectors, including public authorities, local action groups, NGOs, universities, and research institutions. Discussions focused both on the challenges that stakeholders face in accessing EU funds, but also on the opportunities they see for improving applicant performance in the region. And we are extremely grateful for the valuable insights that the mission provided and that laid the groundwork for our report chapter. Following the mission and in cooperation with regional authorities, we developed a stakeholder map that you can see here, a map of key actors involved in EU funds in Silesia. So this includes a set of direct beneficiaries such as NGOs, enterprises, etc., intermediary organizations, and support structures such as information points on the regional and national levels. This map seems complicated, but it is not in fact all-encompassing. It does, however, serve as a bit of a compass so that regional authorities, but also anyone interested in EU funds in the region, can locate the main stakeholders that are involved in EU funds. And just as in the case of other regions, we have developed a detailed SWOT analysis. Summarized version is shown on the slide here. So when it comes to strengths, we have a number of European fund information points that offer guidance to prospective beneficiaries. We have department-specific support services within the Marshal's office. And when it comes to weaknesses, well, we have identified information gaps, underdeveloped communication channels, particularly affecting stakeholders with limited or no priority EU fund experience, and also issues related to staff turnover, which disrupts continuity and limits the ability to apply for EU funding. We have also identified several opportunities that Silesia could leverage, the most proactive promotion being one of them being the more proactive promotion of existing support mechanisms, the use of cascade funding schemes, and then better leveraging Silesia representation in Brussels to access early information and tap into wider European networks. Finally, there are several threats that underscore the urgency of addressing current issues, such as approaching deadlines for the absorption of shared management funds, the increasing need
to diversity beyond structural funds, and especially as the EU's priorities shift and revisions to the multi-annual financial framework come into effect. Based on that analysis, we have identified 5 key challenges which we then analyzed in greater depth. So first of all, we realized that stakeholders in Silesia often lack awareness of EU funding opportunities and available supports. Information is frequently just too complex to navigate and fragmented across multiple sources, such as regional departments, associations, labour offices. This is especially true for funds under direct and indirect management. Secondly, stakeholders often lack the human resources or technical skills to prepare competitive proposals. Recurring problems include staff turnover, especially in rural areas, or difficulties understanding horizontal policy requirements. So, for example, how a proposed project adheres to the principles of equality of opportunity. This complexity leads to a significant reliance on private consultation firms in the region, which many organizations simply cannot afford. Thirdly, there are financial barriers. Organizations often simply lack the pre-financing or co-financing needed to participate in EU programs. They also fear wasting resources on unsuccessful applications, opting for safer alternatives such as regional or national funding. The fourth project we have identified is limited opportunities for networking and exchanging best practices across different stakeholder groups. Our mission has shown that small NGOs and startups in particular would need an easier access to networks and opportunities to learn from more experienced organizations. And finally, access to EU funds across Silesia remains unevenly distributed. Stakeholders outside major cities face additional barriers, such as staff shortages and limited connection to support structures like European information points. And then to summarize, I would like to share with you some preliminary policy implications that we will later develop in the further part of the project. At this stage, we realize that enhancing outreach and communication channels about available EU funding opportunities is a must. Finally, secondly, we need to consolidate and streamline information on EU funding across all management types. We need to establish a mechanism to monitor calls for proposals under direct and indirect management funds. We need to expand the use of cascade funding programs to facilitate easier access to EU resources for smaller actors. And there's a need for enhancing co-financing opportunities for projects of high strategic importance for the region. Maybe one or two more organizing events targeting all types of potential beneficiaries of EU funds would be a good idea, and strengthening targeted support structures for organizations in rural areas. Thank you so much for your attention. And again, I would welcome all comments or questions that you might have. And I will give the floor back to Margot.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for this very clear presentation. I would like now to hear the reaction from the region itself. And for this, I am pleased to give the floor to Mrs. Renata Brzezinska-Wolny, Manager of the Evaluation Unit of the Regional Program for European Funds in Silesia, in the Marshal Office in the Silesian Voivodeship.
Dzień dobry. Również
Good
będę
morning,
mówiła
ladies and gentlemen. I will also speak in Polish, if you may, so you will need to listen to the interpretation into English. So I represent the Silesian Voivodeship, and I work in the Marshal's Office of the Silesian Voivodeship, and we manage regional programs, European funds for the Silesian Voivodeship. That's the name. I would like to briefly tell you what the cooperation on this project and on the report looked like. This document was widely consulted in the voivodeship. We consulted the materials, the research, the data with different stakeholders, with the mission. So we did gather a lot of information, a lot of data from our partners. What we focused on is the introduction to the report. We consulted elements such as data on our voivodeship. We wanted to make them as updated as possible, the statistics. We also gathered data on our beneficiaries from our partners. One of the graphs you might have seen in Olivia's presentation showed some of the beneficiaries that participated in the programs. It showed how they made use of the European Union's funds. It was divided into different funds, such as the Just Transition Program fund, and some other funds. And I think this data made the presentation more coherent and more specific. You also saw some data on coming from February of this year. It's as updated data as possible, and we do agree with the conclusions that were reached. One of the things that we have realized and that we do agree with is that NGOs and especially SMEs do not make the best use of the funds that are available. The stakeholder map is also something that we cooperated on, and we gathered a lot of data to show you what the stakeholders in the Silesian voivodeship are. I would like to thank the OECD partners for their support, for their cooperation, and they helped us with the map. We suggested a map that did not specify beneficiaries. It was a more general suggestion on our part, a more general map. And we would like to thank them for their cooperation on that part of the report. The SWOT analysis was another important part of that project, of that report. We also wanted this analysis to include when it comes to weaknesses, especially, we wanted to focus on the need to apply to the laws in operation in Poland. Those limits coming from the laws in place are part of the problem in Poland, and we did want to include that in the report. Again, I would like to thank the OECD partners to include our suggestions when it comes especially to weaknesses and to challenges. When it comes to opportunities, we suggested the opportunities coming from the cascade funding. OECD partners suggested that we included that, and we would like to thank them for that, because we do agree that including those opportunities will help, especially those smaller partners, smaller stakeholders. When it comes to the challenges that Olivia has suggested, has presented, we do agree with the challenges. There have been 5 challenges identified, and we are absolutely on board with those. Although they have been identified for different regions, to a large extent, they are common challenges. They are linked to similar problems that all regions are facing, and hence such an important role of that project, because it shows us what the common challenges are, what the common problems are, and how we could answer them, how we could face them in all regions. Those challenges include the limited awareness of EU funds, this is the result of the lack of knowledge, sufficient knowledge. There's not enough human potential to make use of those EU funds, especially when it comes to NGOs, when it comes to small and medium enterprises. We do agree that there are financial limits, financial barriers, problems to pre-financing. And here that report has also identified a recommendation when it comes to how we could face this barrier, and that is cascade funding. Some other barriers include limited options of contact with different parties, with different stakeholders. There are different projects where a partnership is part and parcel of a project, and we feel that we do not make the most of those opportunities. Very often, we could simply enter into contact with more partners, and this could make use of the EU funds better. And finally, rural areas offer special challenges. This perhaps it was the last challenge that we have identified, but it was certainly not the least. The mission has identified this as a very important challenge. I would like to thank you for the opportunity of a very active cooperation on that project, on that report. We have been in close contact with all our OECD partners. We have frequently sent them our suggestions, our comments, and they have shown us incredible support, incredible understanding. We have organized a working meeting which allowed us to implement important suggestions that we have made. From the last mission that I already talked about, and we look forward to further recommendations coming from the project, and we believe that